13. That same day, Jesus went out of the house and sat beside the sea. And great crowds gathered about him, so that he got into a boat and sat down. And the whole crowd stood on the beach, and he told them many things in parables, saying, A sower went out to sow, and as he sowed, some seeds fell along the path, and the birds came and devoured them. Other seeds fell on rocky ground, where they did not have much soil, and immediately they sprang up, since they had no depth of soil. But when the sun rose, they were scorched, and since they had no root, they withered away. Other seeds fell among thorns, and the thorns grew up and choked them. Other seeds fell on good soil and produced grain, some 100-fold, some 60, some 30. He who has ears, let him hear. Verse 18. Hear then the parable of the sower. When anyone hears the word of the kingdom and does not understand it, the evil one comes and snatches away what has been sown in his heart. This is what was sown along the path. As for what was sown on rocky ground, this is the one who hears the word and immediately receives it with joy. Yet he has no root in himself, but endures for a while. And when tribulation or persecution arises on account of the word, immediately he falls away. As for what was sown among thorns, this is the one who hears the word, but the cares of the world and the deceitfulness of riches choke the word, and it proves unfruitful. As for what was sown on good soil, this is the one who hears the word and understands it. He indeed bears fruit and yields, in one case 100-fold, in another 60, and in another 30. This is the word of the Lord.
Thank you.
Thank you, Emily. I would like to jump in on Sam's welcome and just say, if this is your first Sunday with us, you are welcome here. It is sometimes hard for older, established churches to truly be welcoming. Friendly, yes, but to truly welcome others, like Romans, is it 15? Welcome others as Christ has welcomed you, right? So that we so want for you to feel that and experience that here, and to feel acceptance, and like this is a place where you could fit and belong. So I do want to welcome you this morning. We are in a series we just kicked off last Sunday, so it's not late for you to jump in with us on the stories of Jesus. We're the parables or the stories of Jesus, and we're trying to connect those stories to your story personally. And so we hope that'll be clear as we walk through. And today we're in this famous parable of the sower, probably better described, or not better described, because Jesus said parable of the sower. But yeah, it's also the parable of the soils. Okay, so that's what we want to get to. Let me ask you this: is this your favorite? So for some of you, this is your favorite season, the transition from summer to fall. How many of you like this time of year? This is my favorite. Like, you get out the sweatshirts, the evening fire pit, football, it's the right time of year, you know? And I love to work in the yard, because sometimes as pastors, you know, we do a different kind of work and we don't always see immediate results. And so I enjoy working outside. I work in the yard and, you know, just clear the mental space, get something done, and you know what I'm talking about. So one of my favorite things to do is to work on the grass and rebuild the turf in the front yard and overseed and just enjoy working on the yard. But here's the thing. You can't just toss out grass seed. You know this, right? Those of you who care about these things, some of you don't, so you've moved on already. That's okay. But I do love a good green front yard. And so you can't just throw out the grass seed. So you have to dethatch, and you have to get out the rake and dethatch the old grass, right? So we're in the front yard and we're raking, and one of my boys says, okay, why are we raking again? Because there are no leaves. So this is early in the moment, in the process. So I am so tempted to explain, to dadsplain, as they say, the germination process and photosynthesis and all the kind. Okay, but God gives me grace, and I don't do that. I just get my rake and I start working the ground, and there's this pile of dead grass. It's like magic, right? So I say, guys, here's the deal. We've got to get this dead grass out, because what you can't see is that there's this thick layer of dead grass under what looks like it's good, healthy green grass, but it really needs to come up. If we don't get this barrier of dead grass up, the seed will never get to the soil. It won't get access to the soil, and it will just be a total waste of money and time and everything. So we finished raking, and we got the grass seed out, and then the rain came, and it was a beautiful thing. And I'm watering and all that. Okay, here's the point of this parable. If you and I don't realize what's keeping, there's this barrier, there's this layer. That is the point of this parable. This parable is about why so many seeds of the gospel never penetrate into the soil of a person's heart. Remember, Jesus spoke in parables for what purpose? To expose our hearts. Jesus spoke in parables to get access to our hearts, to expose the condition of our hearts. And this story has 4 hearts, okay? So in this parable, Jesus is the sower. He's casting seed everywhere. The seed is the gospel, the word of God, right? The saving message of Christ. And the soil is the human heart. And there are 4 types of soils. I want you to see 4 things, 4 responses to the gospel this morning. There's the hard heart, the superficial heart, the crowded heart, and the receptive heart. Number 1, let's walk through these. The first soil of the human heart that Jesus wants to compare this analogy with is the hard, impenetrable, layered up with stuff. Look at verses 18 and 19 with me. I'm just going to jump right into the interpretation. We talked about parables last week, why he's doing what he's doing, etc. Please go back and listen to that if you haven't had a chance to do that yet. Here we are dropping into verses 18 and 19, where Jesus interprets the parable that he started at the beginning of the chapter. Hear then the parable of the sower. When anyone hears the word of the kingdom and does not understand it, the evil one comes and snatches away what has been sown in his heart. This is what was sown along the path. That's important. This is what was sown along the path. No farmer would intentionally try to cultivate seed on a hard-packed path, right? That's not what he's saying. This farmer is generously sowing seed everywhere, indiscriminately, just going after it. And of course, much seed lands on a hard-packed path right next to the field. And what happens to that hard place? What happens to the seed on that hard place? Well, this is really interesting because it's not the first thing you might have thought of when you were going to unpack the parable to begin with. Satan, like a bird, comes and snatches away the seed off the top of the soil because it's just easy pickings for him. The hard heart is a place that's it sits there for a long time, and he can come and he can snatch it away. Jesus wants to remind us, above all things, in this hardness of heart point, this first soil, that Satan is real. Like he is the sworn enemy of God and the gospel, and he will do whatever he can to keep you from warming to the gospel, to keep you in a state of resistance. He wants to keep you in a state of unreceptive, hard, oppose, and resisting. And the lack of understanding in verse 19 is not because the message of the gospel is insufficient. The lack of understanding in verse 19 is because of the proud, self-sufficient layers and layers and layers of dead grass that keep the seed from getting in, accessible to this heart. And that gives Satan the time he needs to snatch it away, to remove it from sustained reflection and thought. I think that's a really important aspect of this. Satan does not want you to have sustained reflection of thought on the gospel, to contemplate it, to consider it, to be amazed by it. He doesn't want that at all. So the Bible says he comes and snatches. Notice the verbs in that verse, right? So look at this again. It says in verse 19, he comes and snatches away what has been sown. C.S. Lewis, in his Screwtape Letters, reminds his nephew, Uncle Screwtape, reminds his nephew, Wormwood. This is the line. Listen to this. It's funny how mortals always picture us as putting things into their minds when really our best work is done keeping things out. That's the devil's strategy. To keep you from thinking clearly about the gospel and the message of the gospel. Satan loves to snatch and grab and steal, and his techniques include doubt. Did God actually say that? Has God really said? Distraction. You know who really needs to hear this sermon? My husband needs to hear this. My wife. You know what? My children need. You know what? My work. You know who really needs to hear this? He loves to play that. Or deceit. Satan will deceive you into thinking you're not such a bad person, your heart's in the right place, you really didn't mean that. No, when in fact, you very much meant that. But that is the condition of your hard heart. Doubt, distraction, deceit, anything to keep the seed of the gospel from remaining close to the soil of your heart. That's what's happening in this first image. Satan takes it, he snatches it, and it can't remain close to. You can't reflect on it. You can't really act on it. Spurgeon included himself in the anyone of verse 19, and he prayed something like this. Lord, whenever the smallest seed of truth falls on us, listen to this. Lord, whenever the smallest seed of truth falls on us, may we open our hearts to it. I love that. Secondly, there's the soil of a superficial heart. Jesus says in verse 20 and 21, as for what was sown on rocky ground, this is the one who hears the word and immediately receives it with joy, yet there's no root in it. He endures for a while, and when tribulation or persecution arises on account of the word, immediately he falls away. The second place that the seed fell was on this rocky ground. Whatever soil was there was thin and it was shallow. And Jesus is saying, there is a superficial heart that's unwilling to hear the word. There is a shallow heart that is unwilling to hear the gospel. There is a posing and pretending kind of heart. And you know, if you've been around Christianity for any length of time, you've seen someone who receives the word and immediately receives it with joy, right? Like it just looks like it looks real. It looks like something's going on. It looks like there could be new life, but because the soil is so thin and so shallow, what sprouts up ends up not lasting very long at all. I remember, I will not forget this guy for a long time. It was a few years back when Anderson was in about ninth grade. I think Anderson was in ninth grade or so. And he had a friend in, maybe it was eighth grade, middle school years. Anyways, either eighth or ninth grade. And you got to get these things right when your kids are in the second service. Thanks for letting me work this out. So he had a friend who just showed up at church. He's like, man, I'm a Christian now, and I have been baptized, and he was just he was just talking it up. He's like, we're just getting to know him. And I was driving he and Anderson somewhere, and he's just all about it. He's like, yeah, I'm all in. We should tell other people about Jesus. I love this. I've been baptized. This is for real, et cetera, et cetera. And a month later, he's gone. I can't find him. Turns out there was an attractive young lady in our youth group, and that went south. And it's not just teenagers. This has not just happened with teenagers. I can think of, this is not an exaggeration. I checked with another pastor on this. I can think of at least 25 families in the last decade who came on like gangbusters in our church. Either they received baptism, one of us baptized them, or they received church, they came for membership, and within 6 to 12 months, for sure by the 12-month mark, they're gone. It's not that they moved to another state. It's not that something. It's not that something was worked through in terms of really substantive disagreement in the life of the church. It's just that they disappeared. That's a lot of families. The superficial heart is a real problem. Verse 21 would say they lacked rootedness. Rootedness is what's going on here in verse 21 that's missing. Yet he has no root in himself. Jesus is trying to address a superficial heart that really is not letting the gospel sink down and root itself in your life, in your habits, in your patterns, in your everything. And you say, well, I don't have to come to church to be a Christian. Okay, could we just stop for a minute on that? Nobody's arguing theologically you have to come to church to effectively be a Christian. That's missing the entire point. And we can talk more about that another time if you'd like, but no one has deep gospel rootedness apart from a local church, apart from walking with people, being a disciple, knowing one another, loving one another. It just doesn't happen. So content with surface level faith, people often don't really want gospel change. They want religion. They want to belong somewhere. They want to be part of something, but they don't want deep gospel change. And when people in the church invite them to sink deep roots into gospel relationships, like with them, with us, bearing one another's burdens and confessing sin and praying together, well, that's not what they're looking for. And that collides with superficiality. Like it's a train wreck. And then people think, well, it's just easier. Like if they're actually going to go there, I don't want to go there. I'm just going to slide out. And that happens all the time in the church. And what's so sad about it is they need rootedness. They need rootedness. In fact, if you talk to anyone about this who's gone through an experience like that, they might even be willing to say that they lack rootedness. Verse 21 also mentions tribulation and persecution on account of the word. That's the key. On account of the gospel and on account of the word. And most of us have never experienced life-threatening tribulation or persecution because of the gospel. And I'm certainly not inviting that on my life or yours, but I will say this, that one of the best things that ever happens to the church or to a disciple is to experience genuine opposition, because it exposes the shallowness of your heart. That's what Jesus is talking about. What Jesus wants to expose in the parables is superficiality and shallowness. Here's the third heart. And I think this, I'll just get into it. Number 3, verse 22. As for the seed that was sown among thorns, this is the person who hears the word, but the cares of the world and the deceitfulness of riches choke the word, and it proves unfruitful. The third type of ground that the seed falls on is overgrown. And as the seed tries to grow, the thicket suffocates everything that should be happening to grow that seed. And so the thorns and thistles are growing and the seed's trying to grow. But you know this coming out of summertime, that weeds, right? Thorns and thistles and weeds have an incredible ability to suck the life out of the ground and dominate everything that's around it. And that's what Jesus is describing with the crowded heart. He's saying, some of you have crowded hearts. And the things that are crowding your heart are suffocating out this gospel seed. And there are two things, he says, that love to take over the territory of your heart. Do you see them in verse 22? The cares of the world and the deceitfulness of riches. And I think Jesus speaks really broadly, purposefully broadly about the cares of the world. Like the cares of the world entails kind of everything, right? For us, it would be everything from food to social status to technology to career success to travel sports to whatever you dream about that you need to be happy, like have to be happy in this world. Back in chapter 6, Jesus famously said this in the Sermon on the Mount, and this is him describing the cares of the world. Therefore, I tell you, don't be anxious about your life and all of its constituent parts. And then he just starts with what you eat and drink and your body and clothing, but he's not stopping there. Jesus says, don't be anxious about your life and everything that entails. By being anxious, could you add a single hour to the span of your life? Instead, seek first, I'm jumping down to 33, the kingdom of God and his righteousness, and all these things will be added to you. Therefore, don't be anxious about tomorrow, for tomorrow will be anxious for itself. Sufficient for the day is its own trouble. What is crowding? So don't assume you're not in one of these three categories. Let me just ask you straight up this morning, as a disciple, as a believer, because it's possible for these things to challenge us as believers. I think it happens all the time. I'm asking you, can I ask you a really personal question? What is crowding your heart these days? And it changes. The season of your life, as your life changes, the things that crowd your heart change. What's crowding your heart that's keeping, some of you are like, man, I would love for the Lord to speak to me and bring back that freshness and sense of dependence that I used to have. That can happen. But you will need to acknowledge some things have crowded out the soil of your heart. The second thing that tends to overtake the territory of our hearts and souls, he says, is money and riches and the deceitfulness of riches. Now, he's not saying that money in and of itself is inherently evil. Jesus doesn't teach that. The Bible does not teach that money is inherently evil or the root of all kinds of evil in the sense that money equals evil. That's not what the Bible means by that. What Jesus is saying is that riches and wealth are dangerously, deceptively tempting. Riches and wealth are incredibly deceitful. That's the point of this, the deceitfulness of riches. I was just making a short list in my mind of the way I have seen or personally experienced the deceitfulness of riches. And I think it falls into I'm going to just hit you with a couple of categories here. There's this false sense of identity that comes with wealth. You might not be willing to say this out loud, but you might have felt in your own heart better or superior to other people because you have more wealth than them. That's a false sense of identity that comes from wealth. That's the deceitfulness of riches. Or maybe you have a false sense of security. Like, do you feel more secure when the markets are up? I mean, just get really honest with yourself. Do you feel more secure when things are rolling? And then you feel less security. Or maybe you have this false sense of productivity. This has happened to so many Christian businessmen. They are successful, and before long, they start actually thinking, as Christians even, that their productivity and success was really due to their own brilliance, which is shockingly juvenile from an economic perspective in terms of how the world works and how markets work and how business works and how success happens and how trends work. It's just so complex. But we think of ourselves in such distorted ways. We get a false sense of identity from riches. We get a false sense of security from money. We get a false sense of productivity. And then here's the big one. Those are sort of introductory. Here's the big one. We love the wrong things because we're deceived by wealth. We love the wrong things. We have kind of convinced ourselves that the things that we love might even, these inanimate objects, houses, cars, whatever stuff, clothing, real estate, I don't know, whatever your thing is. We love it so much. You would think that these inanimate material objects were reaching out to embrace us and make us feel better about ourselves, as if they could send affection back toward us. That's crazy. This is why people who age are less concerned about material things. People who are growing in their faith, who age, and even those who are not believers. It's really interesting. Those who are not Christians, you get a sense of this from them also. It's almost like there's this awareness that the material world is fleeting. It's temporary. So the Apostle John, in his old age, said that very thing. Don't love the world or the things of the world because they're passing away. You should love something more than material things, than riches. Don't be deceived by the pride of possessions. 1 John chapter 2. I guess I'm just asking you this, and I've been asking myself this all week, so I didn't want you to miss out on it. What is crowding your heart? What's choking out the powerful, beautiful, life-giving seed of the gospel to flourish and beautify you and those around you? There's a fourth kind of soil, and this is the one you want. This is where you want to go. This is where Jesus is headed. Verse 23. As for what was sown on good soil, remember this is the same message being sown on different kinds of hearts. Same seed, same powerful, life-giving. The Apostle Peter talks about it not as the perishable seed, but as the imperishable, life-giving Word of God that not only regenerates the soul, but just brings life in every aspect, right? So, Jesus says, as for what was sown on good soil, this is the one who hears the word, hears the gospel, hears the message of Christ, receives Jesus Christ as Messiah, and embraces it. He indeed bears fruit, and it yields, in one case 100-fold, in another case 60, and in another 30. The difference in the soil is receptivity. That's the key word. The difference in the soil is understanding, openness, receptivity, hearing. Whoever has, okay, Jesus is saying this over and over again in the parables. Whoever has ears to hear, listen, hear, receive. That's receptivity. The difference in this soil is that it's open and a heart is willing to receive it. If you will open your heart, you will miraculously receive the life-giving power of his word. But the way the Lord works, he's not just going to, he's not going to do the raking for you. He's not going to do the dethatching for you. There is a sense in which you are very much responsible to dethatch the soil of your heart and let that seed get access. The 100-fold, 60-fold, and 30-fold, I don't think is a reference to how many souls you will lead to Christ in your ministry or in your lifetime, as if some people will be better at evangelism than other people. I don't think that's what he's saying. I think bearing fruit in a variety of ways, in a variety of contexts, this is what's happening here is he's just saying people will bear fruit in their own unique ways, and it'll be amazing. New life will start in you, and it'll make its way to the surface, and there'll be sprouts of new life, color and grace and goodness and things that are just attractive coming out of you. The fruit of the Spirit: love, joy, peace, long-suffering or patience, gentleness. So I think what Jesus is saying is there will be evidence of change in your life. There will be transforming power in and it will affect you. So there will be more love and less hate in your life. There will be more joy and less sarcasm. More peace, less worry. More patience, less anger. More kindness, less selfishness. More gentleness, less pride. More self-control, less self-indulgence. We call it evidence of grace. It'll be seen in your, because the word, the gospel is so powerful. Like it's going to, if the gospel makes contact, this is the key. If the gospel makes contact, gets access to a willing, listening, receptive heart, it is a game changer. You will be changed by the gospel, transformed.